Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Fred, the Managing Director of Weave. Weave is a consulting business. We specialize in supply chain management. So what I'm going to talk about today, hopefully will be at the heart of what this conference should be about is, do we have, is there a future in the role of the middleman? And I'm going to focus particularly on the sourcing office. Starting with this, there will be four major points I think we're going to cover right now. One will be the fact that we're entering the fourth phase of global apparel sourcing transition. So we're going to talk about that and the implications. The other one will be around the mix of impact that a middleman can have in relation to the degree of maturity of an organization. We would then go into the heart of the subject, which would be, is there a future of the middleman? And if so, what will it look like? And last but not least, we'll talk about innovation and services that should be expected, possibly, of this future middleman going forward. So on the first point, we can probably now count four major phases of transformation of the apparel sourcing industry. Initially started, making things at home in the UK or the US. Things were made closer to the local markets. Then very quickly we moved into China, then into Asian. And I think right now we're moving into this fourth era, which is really making it where it makes sense. Different products would have different manufacturing hubs depending on the value add and the level of complexity and expectation of the driving markets. So what we try to do is, on the next slide, is to show a little bit of an evolution. And what you will see here on this sort of bottom right corner is the evolution of the sourcing office that went along with it. So what you will see on this graph to explain what's going on with the colors, the red part is the density of the sourcing activities, and the green parts will be places where manufacturing was actually taking place. So in the 80s, we're starting the journey of offshoring the manufacturing. So what you can see is the first global supply chain management concept starting to come along. We went from domestic manufacturing with domestic sourcing into long lead times, more complexity in forecasting, more complexity in communication across the world. So the first real-term supply chain management starting to evolve. We then, trying to move this along, there. Or not. Yes, sorry. And then we went on to looking at the very first collaboration and replenishment programs. And P&G were kind of the leading organizations on the fast consumer goods sector. Of course, on the apparel side, TAL was also, at the time, kind of engineering already fast response program. But manufacturers were trying to answer the problem around long lead times and forecast challenges. And we continued on into time. And what we can see as we move forward is the first revolution around the internet and the apparel kind of exporting value starting to become really important. Logistics changed dramatically, and you can see how China now is taking a dominant position. So without the logistics connections across the different points of the world, we wouldn't be able to kind of reach the speed and efficiencies that we benefited in the past years. And then really the story of private label came about. And that was quite a revolution, and everybody catch on pretty fast. It was pretty easy to understand the benefits that private label would bring from a margin standpoint. Look at the size of China. But what happened, so this is Walmart, right, when they first kicked off their private label programs in a significant way. But look at the years, right? Very quickly, in 2015, they brought it all back in-house. That's it. So was there a need for a middleman, And the question can be answered around this graph. So if you imagine your FOB price, if you were to buy it yourself, being the first kind of purple bar on the left-hand side, you would want to get it slightly cheaper if you go through a third party that can actually leverage their position. So the incremental value that you will expect will be around, of course, the FOB price. They should be able to consolidate the volume. They should be able to help you in terms of managing the capacity of the factories, which can have a dramatic impact in terms of their CM cost. You'll also be looking around access to production. So there's maybe some specific machines you want access to, or some particular techniques you want to be accessing. So the sourcing office should be able to find those places for you. And the next one really is about a complete LDP, landed duty paid price strategy. You know, we buy FOB, but the FOB doesn't make the net profit margins, right? The LDP will contribute to a big part of that. So how do I optimize my quality? How do I optimize my logistic cost and my duty? So the value of the middleman came really into optimizing what we call the TCO, the total cost of ownership of the product across the supply chain. And that is where the value comes from. But what we see is the sourcing agent has been really instrumental to the retailers and the brands until they decided to create their own offshore sourcing office. So organizations like Li & Fung and some of the larger independent sourcing offices started to have competition. And what we see, therefore, is there is still a direct correlation today between the size and the maturity of an organization with their reliance or their desire to work with an independent third-party organization that will be sourcing for them. So one of the things that I want to talk about is a few key trends that are really strongly impacting our supply chain right now, and understanding better how should the sourcing offices be responding to those trends. And therefore, this is going to lead us later on into thinking around how should they transform themselves. So the first trend is the perfect order, right? The perfect order, and it's followed by, two major blocks of manufacturing that we see emerging in the world. I think the world is going to come down to probably two big blocks, and we're going to talk about that. The third one is, these days, it's data-led decision-making. The third one, we're looking at retailers and brands, and we heard this with Puma this morning, where they're looking to take further control deeper into the upstream supply chain, which is a new trend as well. Retailers used to not really understand the upstream parts. It used to be a black box. These days, they want to know, they want to control it. And the last one is circular economies and the implication that this has on your sourcing business models. So the perfect order really these days is small quantities at speed record times. Here, of course, you have to quote Zara as the best-in-class kind of example, but many companies these days and many of our clients come to us and say, how do I transform my organization, not to be a Zara, but to actually dramatically reduce my lead times, have a lot more flexibility to respond to changes in the market. So smaller orders, more complex orders, and at record speed. The next one is we really see two blocks of manufacturing emerging. I think you have a block that is forming around the Vietnam-China block, where we will be really looking at products that potentially will be more technical, products that could be more fashion-driven in the coming years. And then we see products who could be more mass market, big production engines that will really be made in Bangladesh and East Africa. Another point around data-led decision-making, we have a lot of conversation on that topic today, but a very good example is the business sphere model of P&G, which I think should be really looked upon by kind of the apparel industry, where they're really looking at life management through cross-functional global groups that will make decisions live through better integration and synthesis of this data pool that they have access to them. We talked about retailers wanting to understand and controlling the upstream supply chain. So it's always the dilemma where the manufacturers want to go further up into downstream and the retailers and the brands wanting to go further up into the upstream supply chain. But this has major implications for the sourcing office, because the sourcing office is at risk of losing complete value add in engaging, being that window with the factories, unless they provide significant value add in that relationship. Another trend, and I'm not sure whether you guys are kind of aware around that, is the circular economies, where the concept of CSR is moving further on into breaking away from this disposable fast fashion business, which is not really good for anyone or the economy, moving more into circular economies where things will be recycled, product will be more durable, product will be more quality driven, embed more technology. And these circular economies will require a complete rethink about how we buy, how we recycle, how we have a reverse logistic network that can bring things back in time for reproduction. So watch this out. I think it's going to be a big topic as well. The point in case is that the middleman has to dramatically up their game, right? There was a mention this morning about the mailbox, right? The sourcing office has this bad position of being a mailbox. Decisions are made in the US or in Europe. Please follow up with my vendor in the local language. I think we've got to move on from that model because clearly there is no value add in that. This is a dying breed. And the way we help our client, because there's a lot of clients who come to us and say, well, how do I stay relevant as a sourcing office? Well, we always come down to this matrix. It's down to add value through design, add value in the make part, and think about optimization of your supply chain. So I'm going to use that to see how we're going to reposition the value add model that a sourcing office can have. So starting with the design side, trend analytics is a big thing. I'll have a little case study on that later on. But retailers are busy, right? Busy, 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 meetings, things, always busy, never have time to look at the data. There's tons of organization, such as what we saw earlier, with Mr. Nash, that provide very valuable information, but somebody has to digest it. Somebody has to make decisions with it. So if your retailer is busy going around and developing products, somebody has an opportunity to catch that trend and add value into the process. We spoke about design capabilities. I mean, these days, if as a sourcing agent, you cannot optimize the decision-making process around sample management, I think you're not going to have a very long existence in this business. It's all about investing into the technology. We spoke with Veit this morning around the shoe business that has opportunities in terms of 3D modeling. This can have significant implications. But you have to invest in the technology, you have to see the opportunity, and you have to be a step ahead of the retailers in that field. And the same applies with product development. These days, retailers are getting smarter and smarter. They don't have to manufacture or design every single product in their collection. What about I want to do some flash buys? What about I go into a manufacturer who has great picking, products are already designed, and I take that on into my private label collection, and I cut completely my time to market. Raw material management, how do I use data, to hedge on that position, keep lower prices, beat the retailers at the game of procuring the raw material. Production capacity planning, integrated networks is a very good one, and I'll speak about that in a minute around the case study. But then we move into the optimized section. And the optimized section is probably something completely new to a number of sourcing organizations in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia. How do I use data and integrate it to actually help my client make better decisions? How do I have a team of industrial engineers who can go into a factory and actually optimize maybe my SAM or optimize some of the process flows that will help actually our end-to-end business move a lot faster? And how do I provide unique services around replenishment? If you control the order mechanism, why don't you manage it all the way into the DC? Right? Saving time, saving decision-making on certain products. This is the full house of services and framework that people should be thinking about. Now, you don't have to do all of it in one go. It would not make sense. What you have to do, though, is you have to select a selection of those things that will make sense as a unique strategy for your sourcing office and that will support the growth of your business. A couple of case studies real fast, conscious of time. But here is the case of retailers that these days, with the fast fashion world, with changing seasons, rely more and more on forecasting. The reality is that if you don't forecast well, you have huge markdowns. And I think we have a plethora of examples in the market of people who are coming out of business simply because they can't handle their margins. So the reality is, how do we then, as a sourcing office, therefore play a part into this process? Well, you would find, and I've only selected a few of them, you would find a number of organizations, particularly in this era of digitalization, that play very significant roles in data management. So WGSN has some great tools where, for instance, they will be having robots who will go on websites and publicly available information. They will capture trends of what people are looking for in colors, or they would have people in the streets of New York or Tokyo taking thousands of photos to understand patterns of colors, and they forecast 18 months in advance, what trends could be available. If your retailer, if your brand is too busy with other things, you have a huge opportunity to come in and add value in the design section. You can go in and provide this recommendation. This information is widely available. Very few use it. It's a missed opportunity. Another quick example is a client of ours, actually, who, in this case, were very obsessed with fashion at low cost. But very recently, when we interviewed the collection guys in Europe, they were like, well, the sourcing of things is amazing at getting us the cheap products. But I don't have a factory who can do good fashion. I don't have a factory who can make a nice seasonal jacket. All I have is cheap products. So it was kind of a one-trick pony. So we worked with them and re-engineered a sourcing model to actually think in a tiering kind of framework where we were guiding the sourcing team to actually have a network of factories and capacity available to actually meet that tiering process, and consolidated the internal process of aligning the teams, constantly reviewing the capacity and changes of the business to align to the requirements. Huge impact. We can talk about that maybe offline. The last example is around data management. So we spoke a lot about data today. But I will just say one thing, garbage in, garbage out, right? So data, take it with a pinch of salt. There is data that is required, indeed, to bring new visibility to things that we don't do today. And the example of managing certain level of information within a factory that we are not managing today adds a lot of value. What we find is in 90% of the case, the data is available, it's just simply not used, or is simply not looked at in a way that shows trends of opportunities for a business. And in this case, I think there's a huge opportunity for the sourcing office to play a part in it. This is the example of kind of a framework where you go from digitalization at the bottom, really as only the enabler of the process. What really matters is how do you then move on towards the decision-making process? How do you align your people to understand the data and make the right decision when needed, right? So as a sourcing agent, what role do you play in that? What value add do you bring? And what we see here is, of course, the big guys are smart enough to sense the opportunity. So Li and Fong, Hanbo, they're rushing into this place. A lot of it right now actually has to do with 3PL logistics, which I think is nothing new, just fancy interface. There's a lot more than one can do, particularly around the realms of planning, capacity management, crisis management, predictive crisis management, more importantly. And I don't think today those sourcing offices are really ready yet to provide those opportunities. But if you're a sourcing office, there's tons of things that data can do to help the buyers back in your country of origin. So real fast, you can see that along the value chain, you can really go way beyond being a mailbox. There's hundreds of opportunities where you can add value in your process. What is important, and I'll finish with this summary, is the supply chain are becoming complex. It's a non-fact. We all talk about it. And retailers and brands are starting to get ready to make these changes. The middleman, in my opinion, can play a significant role so long that they transform themselves and invest in value-add, innovation that actually contribute to the strategy of those brands. And to finalize my talk, we have at Weave an evaluation process that you've been taken through right now that allows you to self-evaluate yourself, see how ready you are to really catch up on those new trends. And at the end, to evaluate what sort of cat are you. On this note, I thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions, I'd be delighted to see you at the coffee break. Thank you very much.